Get ready to fight till the bitter end, because today we're going to talk about final battles. We'll look at the purpose of them, how to structure your story with them in mind, and then we'll wrap up the video with tips for getting the most out of your finales. Here's your spoiler warning for today. All of these contain major spoilers. By the way, I have a new book coming out, and it's on the craft of writing. It's called Story Made Simple, and it covers the 8 key elements of storytelling. Check the description below to learn more and pre-order your copy today. One of my subscribers requested today's video, and I'm glad they did because final battles are an important topic. There's much more to them than just having the hero defeat the villain in some flashy confrontation. So let's talk about how these battles benefit a story by looking at 3 key things your finale needs to do. The first thing is that it has to resolve the central conflict. Usually the central conflict is introduced early on, then the protagonist grapples with this conflict, and finally at the end it's do or die. And whether they do or they die, the conflict should end here with the protagonist either winning or losing. Second purpose of this battle is to demonstrate character growth. We already talked about resolving the external conflict, but we also need to consider internal conflict. Specifically, we need to know whether the character overcomes a lie they believe or a flaw that prevents them from being happy. Typically, when a character overcomes a lie or flaw, they win the battle. If they succumb to a lie or flaw, they usually lose. There are, of course, exceptions to this, and sometimes you might have a more nuanced outcome, like when a character sacrifices themselves for a greater good, or they win a battle while losing something they care about. Lastly, the third purpose of a final battle is to engage the audience with a high-stakes confrontation. When we talk about high stakes, this doesn't necessarily mean the fate of the universe is at stake. Though this can make for a great finale, what's more important is the personal stakes. If we're invested in a character and we care about their goals and what they have to lose, then we'll be invested regardless of whether we're in the middle of a war zone or an office building. Always start with personal stakes and build from there. Now that we know why these final battles matter, let's talk about how they fit into your overall story structure. We've got 3 things to keep in mind here. The first is to connect your inciting incident to your final battle's climactic choice. K.M. Wayland often talks about this in her books, and just so we're all on the same page, the inciting incident is the moment that kicks off your central conflict. It usually happens around 10% of the way through a story, and it shakes up your protagonist's everyday life. It also raises a question that won't be answered until the very end. A question like, will Luke destroy the Death Star? Will Indiana Jones stop the bad guys from obtaining the artifact? Will John Wick get revenge on the Russian mob? The question raised at the 10% mark will get answered during your final battle, so keep these 2 plot points in mind when constructing your narrative. In fact, if you set the question and answer in stone from the get-go, you'll have a much easier time building around them. Second thing to consider with structure is the build-up to the final battle. A lot needs to happen between the inciting incident and the climactic choice. The middle 80% of the story is where the protagonist faces obstacles, struggles with their lies and flaws, and suffers meaningful defeats. Typically, a protagonist will suffer their greatest defeat right before the final battle. In the middle of the story, they often have a series of small victories and small defeats, then boom, they suffer a brutal setback. It might mean the death of a loved one, a major loss of confidence, or some other significant setback that leads us to believe they can't win. It's important to demonstrate that your hero can actually lose, because that enables you to create suspense during the finale. The last thing you got to consider here is the structure of the battle itself. You need to do more than just smash 2 action figures together. The battle is a story on its own, where the protagonist enters as the underdog, puts up a fight, but then hits a point where we doubt their ability to win. Then they find a way to restore hope. They might get help from a friend or seize an opportunity, and from there, things escalate until they have to make their climactic choice. Do they choose to overcome their lie, or do they choose to succumb to it? That choice will determine the outcome of the story. Now, before we wrap things up, let's talk about 5 tips for writing final battles. The first one is to include multiple types of conflict. When we think about final battles, we usually think about physical conflict. Things like fist fights, sword fights, wartime combat, and so on. But keep in mind, there are also other types of conflict, whether it be verbal, strategic, mental, ethical, etc. One of my all-time favorite movies is Good Will Hunting, which is about a troubled young genius named Will who's trying to overcome his personal demons so that he can straighten his life out. Throughout the movie, we see how his fear of abandonment prevents him from being happy, and it isn't until the movie's climax that he confronts his tragic past with some help from his therapist, Sean. Though Sean pushes Will throughout the scene, this isn't a physical battle. It's one that occurs within Will's mind, and when he overcomes his demons, it leads to the most powerful moment in the entire movie. Second tip is don't force unnecessary confrontations. Some writers feel obligated to turn a final battle into a combat spectacle, but that's not always the best way to resolve your main conflict. Sometimes a verbal or psychological battle works better, just like in Good Will Hunting, the example we just looked at. Now, one clunky confrontation that comes to mind is from the video game Batman Arkham Asylum. The storyline in this game is excellent for the most part, as the Joker takes over Arkham Asylum and traps Batman inside while threatening to detonate bombs across Gotham. Batman has to navigate the asylum and stop the Joker, and the story is dark and grounded. It takes itself pretty seriously until the final confrontation. After Batman defeats a number of the Joker's henchmen, the Joker injects himself with a venom-like substance and turns into, well, this thing. From there, we get this cartoony David versus Goliath type battle that clashes with the story's vibe and feels like a total misfire. Now, to be fair, video games usually include a final boss battle, and this was especially true back in 2009 when the game was released, but at the end of the day, Arkham Asylum deserved better. It deserved a smarter type of final conflict. Third tip, the main character has to defeat the antagonist. This is an absolute must, and you'd be surprised how often newer writers get cute here and they have a side character who comes in and defeats the villain or something like that. Now, a side character can help out, but you don't want them robbing the protagonist of their big moment. The main character must deliver the final blow. Tip number 4, character motivation as battle fuel. Motivation is why characters do what they do, and at the final stages of the story, you need to remind us of these motivations. If the hero and villain are simply hitting each other or shooting at each other, the battle won't have much impact. But if you find ways to remind us of why they're fighting and what's at stake for them personally, the battle will then take on new meaning. The classic fight between Rocky Balboa and Apollo Creed is a great example of this. Yes, it involves two guys punching each other, but the movie repeatedly cuts back and forth to show other characters reacting, whether it's the people in Rocky's hometown, or his girlfriend, or his manager, or even the mobster he works for. Cutting to these people in the middle of the battle reminds us of Rocky's personal stakes and how he's trying to create a better life by gaining self-respect. He wants to be more than a bum from Philly. He wants to build a life with his girlfriend. He wants to have a boxing career so that he can quit working for the mob. Those are the reasons why he's fighting, and that's why this fight is so meaningful. Finally, tip number 5 is to ensure there are consequences. If you really want your final battle to have lasting impact, there must be consequences. I mean, it's a battle. There should be, at minimum, some bumps and bruises. More likely, there will be bloodshed, or in some cases, there will be outcomes that lead to major changes or punishments. Change is the key thing to keep in mind here. Ask yourself, how will this battle impact my story world? What will change as a result? Simply put, try not to have things end all neat and tidy. Look for ways to signal that things didn't end perfectly. You might even hint at there being some future conflict on the horizon. The Terminator is a great example of this. Sarah Connor and Kyle Reese face off against the T-800, and Sarah survives by the skin of her teeth. Is there a big celebration with cake and ice cream afterward? No, of course not. Now she has to face the consequences, which means she has to prepare to become a single mom who must raise her son to stop the future war. This movie is a classic because although it ends with a victory, it refuses to ignore the lasting impact of its final confrontation. So I hope this helps. Question of the day, what is your favorite final battle from a story? Let us know in the comments section below. Thank you for watching. If you want to support the channel, please pick up a copy of any one of my books and be sure to leave reviews on Amazon. Bad Parts is great if you like small town horror. It's about people trading away their sick and injured body parts in order to get healthy again. Also, be sure to check out my other videos, like, share, and subscribe. And as always, remember to keep on writing.